These are crooked people. These are thieves. This isn't like a mistake. We're just talking about one person. He got hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars for securing one man, for taking care of one elderly man. He was a service. He got paid millions of dollars for taking care of one man. Total crook. They're all crooks. The Somalians, what they've done to Minnesota, the Somalians, they're crooked as hell. Ilhan Omar, crooked as hell. They're all crooks. And we got them. We got them. Now we're putting the clamps on. But boy, I tell you, that's an impressive group of guys that you have behind you. I was watching that, and a couple of very strong women, too. But I was watching that last night. I said, I'm proud of you guys. These are.
If someone you knew ran a program that lost $250 million in taxpayer money, watched people connected to that program get convicted, and then turned around and introduced a brand new version of the same program in Congress, you'll have questions, real questions. And that's exactly what this video is about, because we're breaking down the Feeding Our Future fraud, the new bill, HR 8798, a financial disclosure that basically changed. Um, it changed by 29 million, and an investigation that still is very much open. No outrage, just facts. By the end of this, you'll understand the full picture and why every single taxpayer should be paying attention. And to understand why any of this matters, you need to know what Feeding Our Future actually was, because a lot of people hear the name and assume it was some small local charity. It wasn't. Feeding Our Future was a federally funded food program that ramped up during COVID. And the idea behind it was straightforward: get meals to kids who needed them while schools were shut down. Federal dollars would flow through nonprofit organizations. Those organizations would distribute food and the government would reimburse the cost. Simple enough on paper, but the oversight was almost non existent, and that gap is exactly where the fraud came in. Investigators found that people connected to this program submitted reimbursement claims for meals that were either wildly inflated or never served at all. And we're talking about locations that reported feeding hundreds or thousands of kids with no evidence that any of those kids actually received a meal. There was no evidence. So one journalist, as you guys see on the screen, Nick Shirley here, went out to Minnesota and physically checked on some of these sites, empty buildings, locations that didn't operate as food distribution centers in any real sense. And yet federal dollars kept flowing to them because nobody was checking. By the time investigators pieced it all together, $250 million in taxpayer money had been fraudulently claimed through this program. Now, here's the part that matters most. This wasn't a theory and it wasn't a political talking point. People actually pleaded guilty in court over this, real convictions. And among those convicted was a former campaign staffer connected to her husband, Tim Menyet. That's not a rumor, that's court record. When you start seeing names connected to someone else, someone's inner circle showing up in federal fraud convictions, the question of what their representative knew and when they knew it becomes completely legitimate. And the geography makes that question even harder to brush off, because according to investigators, the bulk of the fraud didn't happen across some wide scattered region. Nick Shirley specifically noted that most of it took place within roughly a 2-mile radius. Check it out.
About where all this fraud taking place, it's literally not even a 10-mile radius where most of this fraud took place. It's within like a 2-mile radius, and this is all around where her congressional district. And so for her to say that she didn't know about this fraud is such a lie, and she's obviously trying to cover her face. I mean, look at her net worth; it just went down by $29 million.
Yeah. And we know that she had a relationship with many of the individuals involved in this, had campaign rallies at various restaurants connected to this and so forth. Nick, I wanted to ask you about this.
About where all this fraud taking place.
So you seen that, you heard that, right? So now that you guys seen that it happened within a 2-mile radius, sits directly inside her congressional district. When 250 million in fraud happens in your backyard inside your district involving people connected to your campaign, and your answer is that you had no idea any of it was happening, you're asking voters and investigators to believe something that's very difficult to accept. A member of Congress represents a specific community. They're supposed to know what's going on in that community, and they're supposed to be a check on exactly this kind of abuse, not a bystander to it. And the fraud happened, the convictions happened, the money is gone, and those are all documented facts. So when asked what a sitting congressperson knew about $250 million in fraud or the fraud operation inside their own district. That's not a partisan attack. That's just the most basic accountability question you can ask. So that's what already happened. Now, here's where what she said, and while investigators are still connecting dots and fraud convictions are fresh on the record, she introduced this bill. All right. And this bill, the HR 8798, the Universal School Meals Program Act of 2026. And look, if you read the title and nothing else, it sounds fine. Free breakfast and free lunch for kids participating in schools, no more meal debt collection, chasing families for unpaid balances, and new nutritional requirements built into the program. On the surface, feeding children sounds like something nobody should argue with, and that's exactly why this kind of bill is easy to push through without people asking the harder questions underneath it. And here's how these programs actually work in practice, because the mechanics matter more than the headline. The federal government doesn't hand food directly to kids. What it does is send reimbursement dollars to organizations and schools for every meal they report serving. The more meals reported, the more federal money flows out. Nutritional requirements sound protective, but in practice, they also give vendors room to charge more for specific ingredients, packaging, and preparation standards. And those vendor contracts become worth a lot of money fast. And when you make a program universal, meaning every child in a participating school gets a free meal regardless of income, you're now dramatically expanding the number of meals being reported and reimbursed, which means dramatically more federal dollars moving through the system. And that structure should sound familiar because it's the same basic mechanism Feeding Our Future ran on. Federal reimbursements tied to reported meals, minimum on the ground verification of whether those meals actually match the claims, and money flowing fast enough that the fraud wasn't caught until it had already scaled to $250 million. The dollar amounts and the program names are different, but the pipe the money flows through works the same way. And if the oversight isn't fundamentally different this time, the outcome doesn't have to be either. The timing is what makes this genuinely hard to explain because defeating our future convictions are a matter of public record right now, and investigators are still actively working through the full scope of that fraud. And in the middle of all of that, the congressperson, most directly connected to the district where it happened, introduces a broader, more expensive version of a federally funded food program. And if you were designing the system to exploit again, you wouldn't redesign it from scratch. You'll just give it a new name, expand the budget, and introduce it before the previous investigation fully closes. That's not an accusation. That's just logic. And logic is exactly what should be applied before any before a single vote gets cast on this bill. But the bill isn't even the biggest part of this story right now. What's drawing the most direct scrutiny is what happened with her financial disclosures, as you heard Nick Shirley say, that she's and allegedly covering it up. As you've seen her, basically her financial disclosure, or I should say her net worth when it comes to Ilhan Omar, basically just dropping dramatically. And this part requires a quick explanation of what those forms actually are because it matters. Every member of Congress is legally required to file financial disclosures. It's a transparency requirement built into the job. And the public needs to know if their representative has financial interests that might conflict with the decisions they're making in office. You declare your assets, your income, your investments, and the numbers are supposed to be accurate. This isn't optional paperwork, it's a core accountability mechanism for anyone holding public office. Ilhan Omar already filed a disclosure saying she was worth nearly 30 million. Then she amended it. Now the amended version put her net worth at 97,000, which Nick Shirley was talking about with his in regards of inflating her net worth. That's a difference of roughly 29 million, and no, that is not a paperwork typo. If you genuinely had no assets, no business interests, nothing significant to declare, you'll know that before you filed the first version. The only way you end up with a $29 million gap between your original filing and your amended one is if something changed dramatically or if the original numbers were never accurate to begin with. And House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, sorry, not Corner, James Comer flagged two specific issues driving his investigation. The first is an earmark she requested for a project that was later identified as tied to the fraud coming out of her district. An earmark is when a member of Congress directs federal funding specifically toward a project or organization, usually in their district. Requesting an earmark for something that ends up being a fraudulent operation is the kind of paper trail investigators love because it connects a member of Congress directly to where the money went. Now, in Ilhan Omar words, she says that it's made up, it's a lie in regards to the things that she's doing and the things that are coming out.
That this is just a made-up lie because you do not investigate someone for 10 years and not come up with anything.
So then why do you think it's still being talked
Because
about?
these people are disgusting. They believe in weird, creepy things, and that's why they want to believe in this weird.
And
That's all I will say.
no, definitely.
Well, that's her body language in regards to that.
Why do you think, I guess, that you're being targeted then? It's
Because
like,
they're racist, they're xenophobic. I just happen to be Muslim, and I don't think you're allowed to continue from there. But,
okay, understood.
yeah, I mean, they're just disgusting, bigoted people, and that's all I gotta say.
All right.
You have not investigated anything. Here's her. Watch.
House Republicans looking into the net worth of you and your husband. Are you cooperating with that investigation and providing the documents?
There's nobody looking into anything. They're just saying those things to get interviews with you guys. There's nothing really happening.
They're saying it's a red
He hasn't
flag.
investigated anything. He hasn't done anything. He hasn't referred me to anybody. He's just saying that so he can get TV interviews because you guys will only talk to them if they say something about me.
Says you haven't investigated anything, Chairman. It's basically all for attention.
Yeah, she's delusional and she knows better. She's trying to say she made a mistake on her financial disclosure form. No one makes a $30 million mistake on your financial disclosure form, especially if you don't have any assets. You know, if you're Donald Trump or some very wealthy person, 30 million might be a rounding error. But for someone who alleges now she has nothing, that's a pretty big rounding error. And it all stems around two basic things, the problem she has. First of all, she asked for an earmark for a project that was later proven to be a fraudulent project that was involved in that Somali scam up there. And then secondly, she claimed her assets were huge because of this winery that we know has been shut down that, according to rumors and press reports, was defrauding investors.
Yeah, Congressman, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. We'll continue looking into.
So there you have it. That was James Comer. You guys heard it from his mouth in regards to what I was saying, basically, in regards to the earmark, right? When an earmark is when a member of Congress directs federal funding specifically towards a project or organization, usually in their district. So now when you see the fraudulent operation and requesting the earmark for something that ends up fraudulent, it becomes connected to Ilhan Omar directly to where the money went. Causes for investigation. And the second problem Comer identified that you guys just heard is that a significant portion of the assets she originally claimed on her disclosure came from a business that, according to press reports, had already been shut down and was under allegations of defrauding its own investors. You can't claim an asset from a company that doesn't function anymore and expect nobody to notice. And when she was asked on camera, whether she was cooperating with the investigation and turning over the requested financial documents, her answer was that there's no real investigation happening and that Comer is only saying these things to get TV interviews that you guys heard in the clip before I showed you James Comer, right? Speaking of Fox News, when she was walking, she went further saying James Comer hasn't referred her to anyone. That's what she's saying, and hasn't actually done anything. And the response is on the video that I showed you, like I said, I reiterate, and it sits directly against what Comer stated publicly, that she's very much under investigation for her to suggest otherwise is completely inaccurate. And she hasn't turned over the documents the committee requested. In any normal accountability context, when someone with a legal obligation to disclose their finances refuses to hand over documents to an oversight body, that refusal itself becomes part of the story. You don't get to dismiss an investigation by saying it doesn't exist while simultaneously declining to provide the records that would settle the question. And on top of all of this, there's a separate question being raised in Congress that has nothing to do with the fraud investigation, but I think it was an interesting conversation I wanted to have with you guys. When it comes to, it has nothing to do with the fraud investigation or the financial disclosures, but it connects to the broader question about who she's actually accountable to, right? And Representative Randy Fine here on the screen from Florida introduced a bill with a straightforward premise. If you want to serve in Congress, you can only hold one citizenship. Let me know if you guys agree with that down in the comments below. No dual passports, no split allegations, one country. That's it. And before you dismiss that as political noise, think about what the job actually requires. Every member of Congress takes an oath, and you'll hear Randy Fine say it when I played it, the video. Takes an oath to protect and defend the United States. And the oath doesn't have an asterisk that says unless you also hold citizenship somewhere else. Fine's argument is simple. You cannot swear loyalty to one country while holding legal citizenship in another, because citizenship isn't just a document, it's a declaration of where your primary obligation sits. What's publicly known is that she was born in Somalia, came to the United States, and was naturalized as a citizen, Ilhan Omar. Fine and others here in Congress have said publicly that they believe she may still hold Somali citizenship, which would make her a dual citizen. She has publicly made statements that some have interpreted as prioritizing Somali interest, and Randy Fine here referenced those statements directly when explaining why he introduced the bill. Now, to be clear, the bill doesn't target her specifically. It applies to all 30 plus members of Congress that Fine says are believed to hold more than one passport. But she's the most prominent name attached to this conversation, and the context of the fraud investigation makes the allegiance question land differently than it might for someone whose district wasn't at the center of a federal fraud case, right? So, looking at that separately, when I showed you in the beginning of the video of JD Vance's task force, right? They've been looking into the possible immigration violations connected to her marriage story. And the specific allegation, which has been reported but not proven, is that her second marriage, which was legally her first on paper, may have involved immigration fraud. The details are still being investigated, but it's worth saying clearly that allegations aren't convictions, but a sitting member of Congress being looked at simultaneously for financial fraud, an earmark tied to a corrupt project, a $29 million swing in disclosed net worth, refusal to turn over documents, and now possible immigration violations. That's not one open question. That's a pattern of open questions. And when every single thread keeps pulling back toward the same person, the same district, and the same federal money, a reasonable person doesn't look away. Any reasonable person. They ask why so many things keep connecting.
Was a citizen of Somalia. She was born in Somalia. She came to the United States. She has publicly said that she puts the interests of Somalia over the interests of the United States. So we can assume that she's a dual citizen, but we don't know that for sure. But she was a citizen of Somalia at some point, if she's not today. And the question is, if you're a citizen of Somalia and the United States, you can't swear an oath to protect and defend two countries. One of them has to come first. You can't serve two masters. So my bill is very simple. You can only be a citizen of the United States if you want to serve in Congress.
When you introduce a federal food program, that program produces $250 million in documented fraud, people inside your own circle plead guilty in court, and then you come back to Congress with a bigger version of the same program that I showed you guys, the new bill that she's proposing, the burden of proof is entirely on you. The investigations are active. The financial documents are still being sought out and to be received. And because she's not giving them. And the public record already shows more than enough to demand real answers. Drop a comment below and tell me this. Do you think Congress should require independent audits and verified oversight before approving any new federal food program? Because that question matters more right now than almost anything else being debated on the Hill. Subscribe if you want more plain English breakdowns of these stories. The headlines buried in talking points. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.